Welcome back to the studio today. We're going to be working on a project that belongs to a friend of mine. She's a very prolific quilter, and this particular quilt is going to be a couch quilt for her daughter who loves Halloween. So probably I'm going to film this now, but it won't be posted until later in the year. But that's okay, I like to have a few things in the can, so to speak. I thought it was funny anyway, because I always like to try new things. That's one of the great things about quilting. There's so many different directions one could go into. And one of the things that I saw while I was doing my Facebook stalking of other artists was someone was using a glow-in-the-dark. They were using a glow-in-the-dark thread. So I thought, that sounds kind of interesting. And I knew that we had some spider webs and some other cool Halloween patterns. And also I've seen some really cool Halloween fabric. So that was one of the things that I thought would link together, was the glow-in-the-dark thread and the Halloween. I also at one point had wanted to do a whole cloth quilt. But I have had trouble finding a Halloween themed tablecloth, which is what I wanted to do it on. I had ordered one, but I thought I had some synthetic fiber in it, but it turned out to be like a nylon flag. I wasn't real thrilled with it. So that did not turn out to be a good thing so far. So I was kind of happy that this quilt came along. The pattern is bordered diamonds. It's a Cave facet pattern from one of his books. I've actually done another quilt like this for Marguerite. It wasn't Halloween fabric, it was Cave fabric, I believe. So we already have the quilt loaded, as you saw in the intro, and I'm going to load a spiderweb pattern. And the one that I have, I think it's called Spiderweb. It'll come to me in a second. I'll tell you who the designer was. I just downloaded it onto my USB stick, so I'm going to go ahead and load that onto the tablet. The pattern itself, the spiderweb pattern, is not directional at all. So for that reason, and for the expediency of doing it, I loaded the quilt horizontally instead of vertically. It just goes faster. There's fewer rows to line up, there's fewer rolls up. So I did that again. I've done that before, so that's nothing new. I'm going to load this glow-in-the-dark thread. This brand that I bought is called Sim Thread, high quality thread. We'll see how high quality it is when I get it on the machine. I know that most people probably practice stuff before they start shooting, but I don't always have time because we do produce a video every week. So I'm going to go ahead and get some of this thread loaded on the bobbin. I'm going to use a white in the back because the backing fabric is white and black, but also this changes to a real nice fluorescent green when it does the glow in the dark bit. And the two colors that I was thinking about were either a pinkish red or a light lavender. Now, one of the borders on the pattern is purple, so originally I was thinking of doing this lavender one. But also the sugar skulls in the fabric have like an orangish red, so I think this is what I'm going to go with. And the other reason is because I like the way the color is, the intensity of the color when it comes to the glow in the dark. I have not used this before. I haven't even tested the glow-in-the-dark feature on it. So once it's finished, I'm going to try and come out at night when I can darken the room out and show you what the glow-in-the-dark thread looks like at night. But that's assuming that we get all the way to that point. So first things first, move the camera. I'm going to load my USB stick into the tablet and upload the new design. Jessica Schick. That's who the designer is for this pattern. Jessica Schick, spiderweb pattern. I'm going to be using it, I believe it's a 13-inch high design, so it should sew pretty quick. What did I think this pad, 46 maybe 56. Anyway, I'll tell you the size when we get over there. I have it written down somewhere also. So let's get moving and see how this progresses with all of these questionable factors in play. I'm at the IntelliQuilter. I started the machine at the front and center. That way it knows where it is in reference to the rest of the frame. The first thing I need to do is take my design off of my USB stick and load it onto the IQ tablet. So I'm going to hit load design synchronize and I'm going to load. So I'm going to take the tablet off the frame, pop my USB stick in the port, the designs are going to come up here and it says file transfers complete. I could go ahead and remove the USB drive, put it back on the tablet, hit the back button, and that's exactly how long it takes to load the design. My USB stick was actually full of a bunch of designs, but I only need one today. So the next thing I'm going to do is design So Quilt, but I have to get my cheat sheet for how large the quilt is. Among the new things I'm going to try today, aside from the thread, is I bought a lavalier microphone that I'm going to put on when I start the machine and see if that helps cut out some of the background noise from the machine while we're sewing. I'm sure I'm going to walk away from the camera more than once and jerk the microphone or the camera, but we'll get it. I'm going to start with designing the quilt. The quilt top is 62 by 86, but I have to remember I have the 86 loaded as my width. So I'm going to add a couple inches to that and make that maybe 89. So I'm going to design So Quilt, start new. I already have a work in progress. Do I want to replace it? Yes. Do I want to erase it permanently? Erase. Do I want to reset my clock? Yes. We're going to be doing a pantograph and I'm going to enter the rectangle manually. If you mark on quilt, the machine has to be able to move over the entirety of the quilt, and because it's on rollers, I obviously can't do that. So I'm entering it manually. The actual size is 86, but I'm going to say 89. Enter. And my length in this case, because of the way it's loaded, was 62. So I'm going to say 65 on that. And continue. And you can see I have my landscape representation of my quilt. I'm going to hit finished. And I'm going to go to downloads, and now I have to find my design that I downloaded. Let's see if it's alphabetical. There it is, Spiderweb 13. One of the things I always do when I download a design from Urban Elements, they always have a inventory control number at the beginning of each digital file. I eliminate that because it serves no purpose. It's only for them to be able to pay royalties to the designer. I don't need it. So I eliminate that, and then I add the height of the design. Because I don't remember these height of these designs. I didn't design them, so I don't know what size they're supposed to be. So for me, this Spiderweb-13, which means the pattern height is 13 inches, is a really great tool for helping me load the design. So I'm going to go ahead and select Spiderweb 13, continue, Spiderweb 13, continue, and there you see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 rows as it is now. I'm going to go ahead and hit gap and change that so it's a little bit closer. That might be too close. That looks good there. And now my pattern height is 13.63. So I'm just going to change that just ever so much till we get it back to 13. Let's see if I can go. I'm at 12.97. That's close enough for me to be happy. I could increase it, but I would rather be on the smaller side. So I'm going to hit finished. and my transition type is continuous. I've shown you what that means before. That means when the design goes on and off the quilt, it's just going to jump down to its next on position, and that's a straight line. Because that happens off of the quilt, that's fine with me. The other options are jump stitches, or you could stop and clip the thread, but I don't want to stop and clip the thread every single time that the design goes off of the quilt. I'm going to trim all that off anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to accept that. And now I'm going to, I also could save the quilt at this point. I'm going to save, rename the quilt, and I could just call this, let's see. I'm calling it Bordered Spiderweb. So we have it as a work in progress. In case we get interrupted or anything, I can always go back to it. So I'm going to save it in my work in progress and be done. Now I'm going to hit Sew Quilt. And I'm going to do panto sequencing this time. I'm going to select the first pattern to quilt, which is going to be probably hardly worth mentioning, but you can see it up there. I'm going to hit continue. I'm going to stop to cut threads at the end of each row. And now we have the whole quilt sequenced. It's sequenced so that it will sew at the opposite end of each row. So it'll sew left to right and then right to left. And so now I can go ahead and hit Sew Quilt. I just put my machine on manual. It took my first stitch so I could pull up my thread. And I'm going to go ahead and push start. It's going to sew very quickly, and while it's doing that, I'm going to go ahead and get wired up. Too good, I can't get it to make any sound. So I am at the end of my first partial row. I'm all the way over to the right hand side. I need to go ahead and lift the foot up and trim the thread. I'm playing a little bit with the thread tension right now. I've reduced the thread tension to 3 for this thread because the thread was breaking. So I'm going to see how that plays out with the next row. So I'm going to hit start. We're going to go over to our start of row 2, which is actually the first full row that we're going to stitch out. I have the edges basted already, and so I'm going to pull the thread up and hit start. And I have a thread break already. So I'm going to play a little bit more with the thread tension and see if we can get past this thread. I've had a few thread breaks which are always really frustrating. What I've done so far to mitigate those, I took the bobbin thread out and I retested it on my toa gauge. I did make a pretty good adjustment on that to reduce the tension. I also reduced the top tension on the head of the machine, and I put a nice good few drops of the silicone liquid on the felt tab where the thread runs through, the thread lubricant, and I even put some on the spool of thread, which I don't usually do. But since I've done those things, the thread breaks have stopped. I don't expect them to be completely finished, but we are moving in a forward pattern here. So I really like the way the pattern is stitching out. It is a fairly dense pattern. It says 236 minutes for the entire quilt. So that's about 4 hours. That's a lot of sewing for a lap-size quilt or a couch-size quilt. So I may have to change colors of thread just out of necessity. I hope I have enough. But I'm just going to let it sew out, and I'll bring it in a little closer so you can see the stitching pattern. One of the things I will say about this particular design is that it's a very dense design. It does have some places on there where it overstitches or back stitches, and because of that it took a while to stitch all the way across. This particular one, I said it was about 89 inches wide, and I had to change the bobbin halfway through. So it took a bobbin and a half just to get one pass. One of the things that you can always do on the Urban Elements website is look at the action GIF for any particular design, and so you could see what the stitch out looks like as it does its full design. And that way you can kind of gauge from that how quick or how slow that particular pattern is going to stitch out. If I hadn't complicated things enough with the pattern and with the glow-in-the-dark thread, after I did the first pass, I decided I was going to use multiple colors of the glow-in-the-dark thread. I've already changed to an orange. The first pass was a hot pink, and now I have an orange on there. I think I'm going to go ahead and feed through a different color each time I do a new row. Normally I wouldn't do something like that, but I have done that before. I did one where I did ombre colors, starting with, I believe it was dark blue, and working my way through shades of lighter blue until I got to a white at the bottom. It's just sometimes fun to do something different to keep your mind occupied, but it is something that I'm going to have to remember to do at the end of each row, is to change the thread. So what I've been doing is getting my spool ready and putting it at the end of the row, just so I know that that's what I want it to do. So I'm already at my start of row 3. It's really my first, I had my first row was tiny, nothing. And then row number 2 was my first full pass. This will be my second full pass, but it is row 3. So I'm going to hit start. And you can hear probably that I have my machine on basting function, because I just basted the 2 edges. Fortunately, I wasn't on to the edge of the quilt yet, so no harm. I also changed the needle. I have in a top stitch needle now to see if that helps mitigate some of those thread breaks. I'm starting fresh for today on finishing this quilt. This quilt is the Bordered Diamonds. It's a Cape pattern. We're using Sugar Skull fabric, and I'm using a pattern called Spiderweb by Jessica Schick. So I'm going to design sew quilt, edit sew existing. I have bordered spiderweb that comes up automatically, so I'm going to hit continue. Do I want to save a backup of the work in progress? Couldn't hurt, so I say yes. So here we have the quilt that I've been working on. Touch a reference point on the screen, and we're going to touch number 4. And I'm going to move the camera over to the little dot I made last night for a start position. This little dot is my start for the row number 4. I made this last night before I shut the machine down. I wrote the number 4 and my little dot. So I'm going to move the needle to there, and I'm going to use that as a realignment point to indicate where I'm starting, so we can go ahead and finish off this quilt. So we have touch a reference point on the screen. We've touched it. Now move the needle to the reference point. I have the needle right over the dot I made for start of row number 4. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hit sew quilt. And you'll see that the quilt, what I've already stitched, comes up in red. I'm over here at my start number 4. So I'm going to go ahead and use a little bit of the silicone lubricant on my thread pad, just to make sure that my thread is stitching nicely. I'm going to adjust my thread tension back to 3.5, which is where I had it last night. You won't be able to see from there, but I have changed the thread again. Row 1 was a partial row, hardly anything. So row 1 and 2 are the glow-in-the-dark pink. Row 3 is the glow-in-the-dark orange. Row 4 is going to be the glow-in-the-dark green, that lime green. And I'm going to just keep changing the glow-in-the-dark colors as I go, because I think it's going to be cute. So I'm going to go ahead and hit sew quilt. It's going to take 1 stitch to let me pull up the thread. It made that stitch right on top of the dot that I had made last night. So I can go ahead and, I do want to put my machine on manual and hit start. Because I used Panto's sequencing assistance, all of the rows are already sequenced and ready to go. I alternated the rows so it sews left to right. The new start will be on the right and to the left. When you do that, it makes it really easy to line up for the next row. All I have to do is roll the quilt and realign, which I've done. I've had more success as I get going with this thread. At the beginning, the thread was breaking a lot. Probably had about 15 thread breaks the first row, maybe 10 the second row. I adjusted the bottom tension. I have it at about a 200 on a TOA gauge. So it's decreased it a little bit. I decreased the top tension a little bit. It's 3.5 instead of 4. And I also put in a top stitch needle. I have a Superior top stitch needle 90/14, and that really seems to have made a huge improvement. So I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm at the start of row 5. I'm incredibly close to my clip, which I'm not thrilled about. I could decrease the size of the quilt, but I'm not ready to do that. I should just about be done with it over here at that edge anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and let this sew out some more. I've also changed my thread color again. I went from fluorescent green to now it's a fluorescent yellow. And I still have a ton of thread colors to use. I wish I had a darker purple, but what I have is lavender, so that will be next because we have purple in both the background fabric and in the border stripe. So I'm going to go ahead and let this sew until my bobbin runs out. I am on the start of row 6. All I did was realign the quilt when I rolled it up. I certainly have this full row, and then I have a partial row. So I have about at least an hour left on this quilt. It will tell me when I push the start. So I have changed my thread color again. Right now I'm on a light lavender. If it was a darker purple, I would have gone with that. But I only have the light lavender in this collection of threads that are glow in the dark. The name of the company is Sim Thread, and I was able to get this off of Amazon. It, I believe, is intentionally designed as an embroidery thread, but it's working fine now. I'm using a Schmetz top stitch needle. This is a 9014 and it's titanium coated. That seems to be the deal breaker with the thread. Once I switched to that needle, it stopped breaking. So I've already pulled up my thread to start. I'm going to push the start button, put my machine on manual, and I've already basted the 2 edges of the quilt. As you might have guessed, I look a little different. That's because a week has passed since the filming of the end of the quilt. While I was about 7/8 of the way through the last full row, I started getting obstruction notices. And I went through a long list of things that I knew to do, and then I went to the IntelliQuilter website and printed out a troubleshooting page for obstruction notices. I rethreaded the machine about 20 times, rethreaded the bobbin, put in a new bobbin, wound new thread, put new thread on the machine, changed the needle, checked the back of the machine to see if the cords were wrapped around anything. I checked all of the wheels to make sure that there was no thread wrapped around the wheels. I checked underneath the quilt to make sure there wasn't a thread nest that was causing an obstruction. And I had to take a rest because it was really frustrating. So when I came back out, I was looking at where it had kept having the obstruction notices, and I was thinking about pulling the seams out for that, and that's when I saw something on the quilt, and I'm going to bring you in so you can see exactly what I saw. While I was staring down at the quilt, I saw this little tiny piece right here, this little shiny bit. At first I thought it was a part of a pin, but I don't use pins on the quilt anywhere where that it could have come from. So I started thinking that it looked familiar, and then I realized that it looked like my check spring. So I looked at the check spring and I could see that it had snapped off. So I immediately called my dealer. My dealer did have one in stock, but I would have to take this mechanism off of the machine and bring it in, which was certainly a lot easier than bringing the whole machine in. But it was at the end of the day, at the end of the week, and I couldn't get up there until this week. So I was able to get up there yesterday, and I got home late, and I wasn't able to put it back on till today. You might notice while I'm working today that I'm glistening because we are, while I'm filming, we're having record heat wave here. It's over 95 degrees. It's very hot. So I have the air conditioning running, but it's futile almost. But I'm going to go ahead and put this mechanism back on. My check spring has been replaced. But it is always amazing to me how small of a piece can be missing or damaged and cause the entire machine to quit functioning. I just am mesmerized. They always say it's the weakest link that causes the problem, and here is an example of the weakest link. So I'm going to go ahead and move the camera so you can see me put this mechanism back on that holds the check spring. This component here is actually a manual tension gauge for the top, but I hope not to have to play with that. I'm just going to put my 2 screws back on and get this in place, and hopefully we can get back into operation. Have you ever had one of those days where everything seems to be working against you? My check spring came out again, and also some little tiny washer. It's almost imperceptible, the size of this little washer. So I'm gonna have to put another call into the dealer and see if I can get up there tomorrow to fix the check spring. So I think I'm going to draw this particular video to a close just for my own sanity. I only had a little bit left in the bottom right hand corner to stitch out, and so that won't get stitched out today, probably won't tomorrow either. But I have 3 other videos that I have to start. So I'm going to draw this one to a close. I probably will not edit this video until I can show what the quilt looked like. I'm going to try and have the quilt layout with the lights on, and then come back out at night when I can see how the glow in the dark works. So that'll probably be tacked on to the end. But aside from that, I want to thank you for stopping by the studio today. For me, it's been a week and a very hot one. And I hope you're cooler where you're at, and I'll see you again next time. But wait, there's more. While I got to thinking about it, I thought there really is no point to making this quilt with glow-in-the-dark thread without showing you what the glow-in-the-dark component looks like, which is why I'm out here in the studio in my slippers. The thread that I used for this project was called Sim Thread High Quality Thread, and I used superior titanium coated top stitch needles. These were 9014, and I used a variety of the colors of this thread. I used the white for the whole back, and I used a variety of colors for the front. I also have purchased some black light bulbs. The reason is that I've already done a test on this quilt to test how bright the glow-in-the-dark thread was with just turning the lights off. And the truth of the matter is, it's not bright at all. It doesn't illuminate the thread whatsoever. So whether you want to call it false advertising or misunderstanding, this thread does not glow in the dark. But I did purchase some UV LED blacklight bulbs to make this thread glow, and I have already tested that as well, and in my opinion only certain colors really pop with the glow in the dark thread, but I'm going to let you see that. The sun is finally set outside, so we can go ahead and get this last portion done. So I'm going to go ahead and turn out the lights and turn on my black lights, and we'll see just how well the thread glows in the black light experiment. Well, I don't know if you can see from there. I know that the white strips on the bordered diamonds are illuminated, and up close you could see that the orange and the lime green are showing up. This one is showing up a very little bit. The thread in the bobbin is also the same glow-in-the-dark thread, and it's funny because this one is showing up where this one is not. And I did have two white spools of thread, so I don't know which one of the two is glowing and which one isn't. But I'm going to see if I can bring the camera in a little bit closer and see if you could see how well or unwell the glow-in-the-dark thread is up close. So let's take a closer look. I can't really tell on the camera at this point if this is showing up at all. The orange and the lime green are really illuminated, but it may be overshadowed by how bright the white of the diamonds are. So I don't know if I'm going to get a better shot than this. Well, that was a fun experiment. I certainly think that two of the colors worked a lot better with the black light, but the rest of the colors didn't seem to show up except for the one little bit of white, but I don't know which one of the two whites it was because neither one were labeled. So perhaps in the future, if you have a glow-in-the-dark thread, maybe test some out before you do a whole project. The quilting still is beautiful, and you can still see the quilting in the daylight. It just has lost some of that spooky, eerie feel that the glow-in-the-dark thread was supposed to provide. This particular spiderweb pattern is very dense. It goes from one spiderweb to the other, so it connects like two or three and then back and then forward again and back before it completes a section. So there's a lot of overstitching, there's a very dense pattern, and it takes probably 3 times longer than a normal panto. Once it's finished, it's beautifully stitched out. You can't really see where it's been overstitched because it's very precise, but it does take longer than a normal panto would, so I would build that into your expectations for this particular pattern. So I don't know, I probably will keep the orange and the green fluorescent thread, but I'm going to throw the rest of it away because it doesn't really do what I wanted it to do, and it was a little bit on the thin side. It's only a 2-ply instead of a 3-ply thread. So all in all, I'm glad to get it finished. This took several tries. It was on the machine and off the machine because my machine had to go to repair. It broke down while I was working on this. The check spring broke. So it was a lot of starts and stops for this, but I'm glad it's finished. It's finished in August, and it doesn't need to be delivered until October. So we have that finished. That's a good thing, and it's always good for me to test new things. I do like the way the 2 of the thread colors worked, but the rest I think was kind of a bust. So thanks for stopping by the studio. Thanks for watching this little addendum, and we look forward to seeing you next time here in the studio.